Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, which was named by Poets and Writers a best book for writers. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. And follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, and I'm executive producer of the program. And today I am so delighted to have Regina Brooks with us. And let me tell you a little bit about her. She is the founder and CEO of Serendipity Literary Agency in New York. It's the largest African-American-owned agency in the U.S. She is the president of the Association of American Literary Agents and co-producer of the People of Publishing Conference. And she's also a founding member of Literary Agents of Change and the Black Book Accelerator. She's the author of Writing Great Books for Young Adults and You Should Really Write a Book, How to Write, Sell, and Market Your Memoir. She's a co-publisher with Open Lens, an imprint of Akashic Books, and she's been highlighted in the New York Times, USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, and other places. And when she's not agenting, she's gardening, fishing, and flying her own plane, always in a dress. I love that. Welcome to the program, Regina.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here, Estelle.
We first connected many years ago through a mutual friend, Catherine Sands, who was the agent for my first book, Beautiful Skin. So that was a long time ago. And we recently reconnected for the People of Publishing Conference that I attended, which was a wonderful bird's eye view into what was going on in the industry and publishing in general. And so I want to go back and talk about your agency to start with. I love when people have stayed with agencies for a long time. Yes. And there's no better way to guarantee that someone stays with an agency than if they are the owner and the founder and the president. So can you talk a little bit about your journey becoming an agent and becoming an owner and starting your agency?
Yeah, I come to publishing from a very different background. Most people come into publishing, they have English majors. I majored in aerospace engineering and went to the Ohio State University. And my interest in publishing was adjacent. I used to write poetry and have always had a creative bug in me. But my goal was to become an astronaut. And so one summer, before I was getting ready to go work an advanced degree, I went to Howard University. They had a summer publishing program. And in that publishing program is where I caught the bug for publishing. And I started working at John Wiley & Sons as a sales rep. And then after several months, they moved me to New York and I became an editor. They had 2 computer science books, and it was in Pascal and in Fortran, if any of your audience remembers back then. And so my goal as the editor was to build out their computer science list. And it was right around the time when the .com craze, it was right before the .com craze. So the timing was perfect. And I was working to develop books for higher ed and college environments to teach computing. And then so I worked at Wiley, and then I moved over to McGraw-Hill, and I was working there for a while. And then I decided, you know what? That was the first time I had experienced working with literary agents. And I was looking at the numbers and I was like, wait a minute, I'm offering them this amount of money. And then the agent gets this percentage of that amount of money. I'm on the wrong side of the business, especially given the fact that I've always had kind of left brain, right brain conflict. And being an agent allows me to work on with both sides of my brain. When I was working at Wiley and at McGraw-Hill, I was working on very specific types of books. But as an agent, I can work on all sorts of books, whether that be children's books or medical books or psychologists or fiction, anything. And so I love the opportunity to be able to work in various different genres.
I love that. I don't know if you saw my eyes twinkling when you mentioned John Wiley, because I have a story about that. I had left a job that I was doing kind of like administrative work, but also writing some brochures. And I took a job in the legal department at John Wiley, helping somebody just doing legal stuff, just like proofreading and typing and, very kind of mundane things. But I always had my eye around what was going on. And I met somebody who was head of the copywriting department that they were dealing with brochures. And I said, oh, I've written brochures for different companies I've worked for. And he said, do you want to try your hand at writing the copy for the books? And I was like, I would love to. And he loved what I did and gave me more work. And that kind of helped set up my portfolio so that when I moved to my first job in magazines, it really helps support that. Isn't that so funny? It's such a small world.
It is a small world. I will tell you that John Wiley, first of all, I love that company. It was where I cut my teeth. Everything about my experience at Wiley, I feel I feel blessed to have learned in that environment. It was very non-hierarchical. Brad Wiley was one of the editors, and his office, I think, was 2 doors down from me. I just really, really enjoyed being there. And I think what happens in publishing in general, especially people who are trying to shift from one part of the industry to the other, you definitely work with the people that you've worked with before to do freelance work. So when I first started my agency, I mean, you know how agents make money. It's very difficult. It's a very difficult business where for the most part, straight commission. So living in New York on straight commission is not easy. So I did a lot of development work for some of the editors at Wiley, and it helped sustain me until I was able to make money as a literary agent.
So tell me about your agency. I mean, you cover everything. I was looking at Publishers Marketplace. I did a little printout of your.
Actually, I don't even have everything I need to have on Publishers. I totally need to update them. Yeah,
that's what I hear. People are like, we're so busy, we haven't updated, but you still have quite a lot. And it's such a wide spectrum. You're covering children's books, you're covering picture books, then you have middle grade and YA, you have arts and crafts, you have business and career, medical and health, nonfiction, erotica, historical, just one erotica, historical fiction, narrative nonfiction, and it's just so many books. So it looks like you're very open to all different kinds of books, titles, and I like that open-minded focus. Can you talk a little bit more about your focus and how you've gotten to that point?
I mean, one of the things that I really love about agenting is that you can work on any kind of book that you want, anything that tickles your fancy, And one of the things that I love, I've always been a person who loved to learn. And who better to learn from than people who are experts in the field, because most of the experts are the ones who are writing books. So I feel like I'm always on the cutting edge of something new. And that newness always is refreshing for me. And sometimes when I'm talking to friends, they're like, how do you even know about this stuff? And I'm like, I read. And I'm getting lots of different types of topics. I also represent illustrators too. In fact, my first client that I sold a book for was an illustrator. And the success of that book helped to assure me that I was in the right place.
So I'm going to ask you the $100 million question.
Yeah.
What gets your attention in a submission, in a query, in a hi, so nice to meet you at this conference that you're helming or that you're
Yeah.
speaking at? What
Yeah.
is it?
It's not one thing. I wouldn't say that it's one thing. Some of the best things that help me understand whether or not you're like the right person to work with, because the thing about it is it's the work, but it's also the person, because you can have some really great projects, but I might not be the ideal person to work with you on that particular set of projects. So one thing I look for is a person who has a very clear understanding of the marketplace. Now, you would think that the first thing that I would say is a person who has gorgeous, beautiful writing. And yes, that is incredibly important. And of course, the first thing that I look at. But having an understanding of the marketplace, especially now, because there's just so many books and so many ways to enter the marketplace, I think that there's been this, some of it's true and some of it's not so true. There's some myths around what it means to be an author. And I think the people who understand and don't underestimate the challenges that it means to be in this marketplace are much easier to work with. And that ease in working with someone is really important to me. You don't get to know that really until you have the conversation. So when I'm looking at a query, I'm looking at the writing and whether or not there's a cohesiveness to it, whether or not it doesn't sound like AI.
Let's talk about that. So the idea is, and this is my thought about AI. I teach at NYU, and I think when people tell students don't use AI, they're misstepping because they're then going to go out into the job market. And
Yes.
every single company is contracting with AI. And in
Yeah.
fact, and I've talked about this before on my podcast, I think the future is going to be teams where somebody is managing the AI. And so knowing how to manage AI, and AI is very much a judgment call, right?
Yeah.
It's like, this is wrong, this is not verified, this is this
Right.
is
Right.
that. For the writing, I'm a big believer in you have to have your voice. You have your voice. AI does not have a voice. I'm not saying that it won't. At some point, it could.
As a former aerospace engineer, I am always tech forward. So I'm not the agent who's going to say to you, don't use AI. I am going to tell you that you can use AI as a tool, but I can tell if a manuscript has been written by AI. I can tell. And there's a difference. You talk about voice. There are whole books that are going up on Amazon where the table of contents and the whole manuscript is just filled with AI language. And for some people, those books are fine. And there's, again, let me just say something. There's generative AI, and then there's AI as a tool, right? So generative AI allows you to put in prompts and allows you to create content from those prompts. That is AI leading the way. Then there's a person who's writing a manuscript, and then they may put in a question, oh, does this sentence sound right? And the AI can coach you along the way. That's
Right.
different because it's your idea, it's your words on the page, so to speak. That's different. So AI is definitely here to stay. It's not something I think that people should be afraid of. In fact, our company, John Wiley and Sons, just hired an AI executive who's going to be a part of their CEO or their C-suite. So it's here to stay, and publishers are using it in all different ways to help with marketing, copy, to help automation. So I would never tell a university student at this point in AI's evolution not to use AI. I think it's very important to understand it and to know what it's all about. And you don't want to wait too long because you're going to be too far behind and you're not even going to understand the importance of it and how it works. And as an agent, I'm really encouraging my organization, the Association of American Literary Agents, to have a really strong understanding of AI, because we're already starting to have AI companies license the work from our books and our authors' books. So
Yeah.
if you don't understand it, how can you effectively represent your author? You cannot close your eyes and say, I don't know AI for me. Not in today's marketplace. It's just not realistic.
Let's go back to what you're talking about. Somebody who understands the industry. And I agree. I think that's really important because it's going to help with the battles, right? Somebody
Mhm.
who doesn't know, who's never been with an agent before, or maybe who doesn't understand about publishing might fight every little detail. Whereas the big things that you have, your vision for your book
Right.
needs to be paramount.
Yes, and how it's positioned. And I can tell you that I really appreciate podcasts like this, where you're educating the writing community, because there's so much misinformation out there. And authors, honestly, they lie to other authors about
Yes.
what is truth and what is actually happening as an author. And so people get kind of caught up in things that they think are real and really don't have any kind of semblance of what we actually are doing in the industry. And that really comes to bear when we talk about PR and marketing. People think, oh, I'm going to go in, I'm going to have a book tour. They're going to pay for me to go across the country with my book. It's just not the way things work today. There are so many other discoverability engines that publishers are not investing in having people go to Columbus, Ohio, and sit at a Barnes and Noble with five people.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make any sense. So having an understanding of that and an appreciation for, especially if you're doing nonfiction, of the pre-work that you have to do beyond the book, beyond writing the book, but the pre-work that you have to do and the strategy that you have to come to the table with to tap into your audience. Knowing who your audience is. People talk a lot about platform. Oh, you have to have a platform. But really, what they're saying is you have to have an understanding of who your audience is going to be. And you have to know where they are and how to get to them and how to communicate with them and what's going to attract them to your content. The publishers rely on that. They're doing some market research, but there are thousands of books that are being published. So they are asking the authors to come with a level of expertise to help them help you. And so working with an author who understands that fundamentally and is not averse to doing the work to help a publisher understand their project and not being upset about the fact that, wait, they just bought my book and they don't understand my topic. No, you're going to have to be the educator. And that's for the publisher and for the agent.
I think that's so important to say. And
Mhm.
so when people want to query you, what do you like to see from them? I know you have your instructions on your site. I'll share that. But what you want to see a query letter? Do you want to see the first 50 pages or just the first three chapters or the
Yeah,
proposal?
what I used to do is on my website, I have a form and you can fill out the form. The form has all the elements of the what's normally in a query letter.
Yes.
So I would ask for that. And then for fiction, I would ask for maybe the first 50 pages or the first three chapters. What I found is as I'm trying to move along faster because we're getting a lot of correspondence, I'm just asking people to send me the entire manuscript. Now, will I read the entire manuscript? Maybe or maybe not, but at least I don't have to put in that second step of requesting after I read the first three chapters. Now I got to go back to you and ask you for the remaining manuscript. Just send the whole thing. So
And so is that for fiction, for memoir, or just only fiction? Are you
only fiction. And for nonfiction, I'm still looking for partial. I'm
yeah.
looking for a proposal, a very robust proposal, no one pagers or even two pagers for that matter. I'm looking for a robust proposal and sample chapters. If you've written the entire manuscript, you can send that along, but I usually will take three chapters.
And so for memoir, you're looking for, so you don't need the whole thing, you need proposal and sample chapters, but in the proposal, you want the breakdown of the chapters, I'm assuming as well.
Right. Well, let me just clarify. Let me
Yes.
clarify. So in my book, that I wrote this book, You Should Really Write a Book, How to Write, Sell, and Market Your Memoir. And in that book explains what an RU is. So an RU is a person who's relatively unknown. So if you are a relatively unknown person, I want to see the entire manuscript, entire memoir, along with a book proposal. If you are a person who has a huge platform, you may or may not have to send the entire manuscript, but the best memoirs read like fiction, right?
Yes.
You're reading them, you're caught up in the flow of them. And I need to be certain that this isn't just an idea, that you can execute on the full manuscript. So if you're a relatively unknown person, ideally, I would love to see the entire manuscript in an ideal world. Because here's the thing, if you don't have a huge platform, but you have a really good idea or a hook and you have incredible writing, I still might want to work with you. But I need to be able to see that you can write. But if you don't have a huge platform and you just have an idea, and I'm just looking at the first 3 chapters, I don't really know that you can write a full narrative, because I've always seen the first 3 chapters. And that writing is going to be so important in my ability to be able to sell your book, especially if you don't have a huge platform.
How important is the person's personality when you're having that call, when you're talking to them, a Zoom call, I'm assuming, or face-to-face?
I mean, here's the thing. This is another thing that's kind of exciting about the business, is the fact that there are so many different types of personalities that come into this space. And that can be fun. It can also be crazy making. But I would say the personality, I like to work with people who I can work with. You know, if you're difficult, I mean, it may sound obvious, but there are agents who work with difficult authors. I try not to work with difficult authors because the work is hard enough in and of itself. And then have to feel like you're getting beat up by your author. That just makes it hard. So so personality does make a difference. And when I say personality, I don't mean like you can be an introvert, you can be an extrovert. Those things don't really matter. It's really about ease. I'm looking for ease.
That makes so much sense. Absolutely. I wanted to ask you, it used to be, I mean, when I started in publishing 30 years ago, when I was in magazines, I would get the catalogs from the publishers, and it was just the big 5 or the big 6, how accounting used to be. And now it's all the small presses and the university presses. And the university presses might have been around then, but
yeah, they had a different mandate at that time. Yeah.
And then you have small presses having deals with distribution systems, like with Simon and Schuster. So they distribute for Skyhorse and for other publishers. How does that change the game, in your opinion, from how somebody can make a decision, a publishing decision?
Most authors, not all, but most authors are interested in working with the big 5. They're looking for a big deal, right? Right. I'll tell you, not all the big 5 are giving big deals, but one of the things that has made, in many ways, my job a little less stressful is the fact that you have all these other smaller imprints and smaller presses to go to. And sometimes they're the better space because you're going to get the kind of attention that you need or deserve. They're going to help you develop the idea or the concept in a way that's going to be more marketable. And the cool thing is that these imprints do have distribution. So your book will get into the bookstores and those channels that the big 5 have access to. So you can kind of get the best of both worlds. And you may or may not get the same kind of money, but it's also a good place to cut your teeth, so to speak, so that you can get a sense of, okay, how does this whole publishing experience work? And then if your book has sold well with a smaller publisher, the bigger publishers can see your track record and are interested in maybe your next book or a different idea.
And for publishing and being an agent, a lot of it is about relationships. So I was looking at the publishers of the deals that you've made recently. And so you have Scholastic, you have Norton.
I've done stuff with Penguin Random House, new imprint they have over there called Storehouse Voices. I've spoken,
Sentient, you have
yeah,
Sentient.
Sentient. Yeah, Sentient. They are distributed through Simon and Schuster. And one of the cool things about Sentient is the fact that I was working on a memoir with one of my authors. The book is Live, Die, Repeat, and it's a spiritual memoir. And they were really the ideal publisher for it. And it was exciting to find them and to see that they understood the author was Buddhist and they understood all of the things that feed into that type of a book. So they were the best, they actually were the best publisher for it.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, there's so many. If you go to your publisher's marketplace listing, you have Broadleaf, you have New Harbinger, you have so
Yeah.
many of the traditional publishers. But it seems that it's really opening up now, and there are lots of opportunities for good books to be published.
And you mentioned New Harbinger. So New Harbinger does a lot of books with psychologists. And the book that I sold to them was from a preeminent psychologist. And they do trade, of course, to the average book buyer, but they also do B2B. So they'll do like an electronic catalog to psychologists who might use the book or have an interest in the book for their practice. So again, it's like finding the right publisher for the content that your author is trying to write.
Let's talk a little bit about People of Publishing Conference, because this is something you co-founded. You had the first conference. I thought it was wonderful. It was really warm. It was inside baseball, but I love sharing inside baseball. And I think it's such an important thing to get out there.
So our organization is the Association of American Literary Agents, and we represent, so to speak, we're kind of like the governing body for literary agents around the country. And if an agent is not a part of the organization, it does not mean that they're not a legitimate agent. They are. But one of the things that we really adhere to is an ethical standard. And as president of the organization, I really wanted to make sure that our organization got a chance to meet. And I really wanted to focus on professional development. Professional development is very hard to come by in our industry as a whole. Once you become an editor, it's kind of catch as catch can to keep yourself up to date on certain things. And the same thing with agents. Agenting is very much an apprentice business. And one of the things that I'm hoping that the People of Publishing Conference will become, this is going to be our second year, September 30th. We're doing the part 2 or, second annual. I wanted that conference to be a space where editors and agents could just step out of their day-to-day transaction cycle and examine all the individual decisions that are shaping the industry as a whole. We talked earlier about AI. The knowledge base on AI just in and of itself is so varied within our industry. There are people who don't know what an LLM is. And then there are people who are really using the tools to help them do their job. I wanted to find a way for us to level set and have a much better understanding of these things as a whole. And I use AI as one example, but there are a number of other things. You mentioned authors who are working with smaller publishers, but there's also a growing trend of direct to consumer. So it used to be considered, oh, I'm self-publishing my book. That's not really how it's framed now. It's authorpreneurship. And it's the idea of, I know who my audience is. I know how to get to my audience. I just need the book in hand to be able to do that. So authors are doing direct to consumer. And there's a whole ecosystem around that. And our industry, the traditional side of it, they need to have an understanding of how that's working and what are some of the elements of it that are making these authors super successful.
So, Regina, I'm so glad you brought this up, because I've had several successful authors who've been traditionally published say to me, my next book, it's going direct to consumer. I have the audience, I have the website, I have the social, I have everything that I need, and I'm just cutting all that out and I'm just going direct.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. The publishers want you to come with your audience, with the ability to sell to your audience, and they do a fantastic job of packaging you and packaging your work, but they take 90% of it. Direct consumer is not for everyone. You need to be willing to be in the business of publishing. And not every author is interested in doing that. But the direct and a lot of the big time publishers are starting to contract in the number of books that they publish. So it's harder to get in, even if you have a wonderful book. So authors are saying, well, if I can't get in, I need this book out in the marketplace. I want this book out in the marketplace. I'll do it myself. And they do a fantastic job at it. So that even understanding that, it was important that editors and agents across the board get out of their siloed lens, basically open up the aperture so that they can have a better understanding of things that are happening outside of their specific lane.
I've been seeing that in the business coaching realm. I've been seeing that in the financial realm. I think if they have like a built up business, sometimes that is how it works for them because they're not really in the publishing world. So it's kind of like a tool for them. CEOs, they need to get it out. They need to have it. They're speaking at all the conferences and then they make the deals with the companies with the sponsorships. You know, they'll buy a certain amount of books and it's just bypassing any royalty that would go to anybody else in a publisher or any situation like that.
As a response to that, there's growing hybrid model for hybrid publishers because yes, a CEO may say, okay, I need this book. I'm willing to invest in having this book published, but they don't really want to be in the publishing of books. They don't want to be in the business part of it. They want to sell their book in the back of the room. They don't want to think about inventory and paper quality. That's not where they want to be. So this hybrid model, there are wonderful hybrid publishing companies with very experienced practitioners who are helping the CEO types to publish their book. So that's to some extent also considered direct to consumer, depending on who you speak to.
And so how do you differentiate that from people say don't go with the vanity press? Like how is
the vanity press idea and concept is like 1990s, 2000s, you know, it's not, yes, there are still some quote vanity presses, but it's not really the way we look at the world now when it comes to publishing. Yeah. These realities and these changes and shifts is one of the reasons why the People of Publishing Conference is so important to our industry. It takes the guesswork out of things because there's so many things happening. And if your head is down developing a manuscript, you may or may not even be aware of it. So the conference is designed to help people really understand. It gives career guidance and to make sure that you have your finger on the pulse of what's happening. And you know how like lawyers and doctors have to do CLE and CME courses?
Yes.
Well, I see ultimately this conference serving that role. So once a year you come in, you find out, okay, what's happening in what haven't I seen in Publishers Weekly, or given me a deeper dive into Publishers Weekly, some of the top line articles I'm seeing, what does that actually mean? And what does that mean to me and my role? And how can I take advantage or understand it better? Yeah, it sharpens your editorial instincts, helps you understand what's commercially sound, because you may be working in a vacuum and you may be thinking, oh, okay, well, this worked the last 5 years, I'll keep doing it. But there's all these other things that are bubbling up that you're not aware of that could factor into how you do your job.
And I love that, you know, AALA is that you mentioned about the ethics. And so it's one of the things when you're looking for an agent to make sure that they're part of AALA, because there's certain standards that they're going to meet and adhere to as an agent. What else do you see happening in the industry in the next 3 to 5 years? Because it is such a chaotic and actually fulsome but exciting time. But what do you see happening?
Oh, you want me to be the futurist? Okay.
Why not?
Yeah. Okay. So let's see. I'm actually working on a article I'm going to put up on my LinkedIn about 5 things that I think might be forthcoming. And you can't talk about new things without talking about AI. From an agenting perspective, I think that agents are really going to have a true understanding of licensing. I think that historically, when you're an author, you're thinking about selling the book, you're thinking about the print run, you're thinking about ebook, and you're thinking about audio. I think licensing of your AI rights is going to become extremely important. So, and even within AI rights, there's a lot of fragmentation. So agents are going to have to be aware of who these AI companies are, how they do their business, how do they use your content. All of those things are going to become, and already are, very important. Also, I can't talk about AI without talking about the fact that in the fall we were in as agents, very tough time because of the Anthropic case.
Yes.
Right. And so we were trying to, at the ALA, we were pushing out information so that people were very clear as possible on what this meant for their authors. And there's a lot of other lawsuits that are happening. And I think those things are going to continue to happen. And also copyright is going to become even more important than ever. Who owns the copyright? So those are 2 things from, at least from an agenting perspective, that I think are going to be important. From an author perspective, I think it's going to be more and more important that you have an understanding of positioning and the context in which your book, the field and landscape in which it falls into. It's not, I mean, that's always been the case, but even more. And I also see authors, I will say this on the nonfiction side, seeing themselves as kind of a brand, so that the book is an extension of your brand, if that makes sense.
Yes, no, absolutely. Like with my book, I did a TED Talk called How to Get Noticed in Your Writing and Beyond. That was last year. So that's part of my brand.
So you have to think of your content, and you're no longer selling a book. You're not looking at it as a book. You're looking at it as a map.
Yes.
And how do I map the content into all these different ways? Yeah.
Yes. And people use my book as their syllabus for university courses, other courses. I use it for my syllabus. So that has increased the life of the book as well. It's interesting when you talked about rights, because my publisher, New World Library for Writing Nights Notice, tried to sell I guess they had the rights, and then they tried to get an audio company interested, and nobody was interested. And so they reverted very kindly, they reverted the rights back to me. But a year,
now you can go out with those.
which was, and I thought, you know what, I'll do something, maybe I'll do something with him at some point, whatever. And I was like, that's fine, I understand, it's a writing book. And then lo and behold, a year after the book was out, I heard that somebody was interested. Who was interested? Dreamscape Media.
Oh, yeah.
Which is the billion-dollar company now. So the publisher asked, my agent asked, if I could revert the rights back to the publisher. And I said, sure. And they made the deal.
It's easier to have the publisher get the files over to them. And also it's seamless as you're working. Yeah. I will say, over the last 5 years or so, the audio book has just skyrocketed in how people really digest content. And I think there's been discussions about the fact that the long form podcasts, like what you're doing now, help potential readers have an ear for listening. for longer periods of time.
That's interesting. I
Right?
didn't know that, but that makes so much sense.
Yeah, I mean, there are people who do back-to-back podcasts, listening to them for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and that makes kind of gears your ear.
Yes.
Listening to a book. Of course, also people are just super busy. So the idea of having having the chance to just sit down with a book,
yes,
it's a luxury. It's a luxury, but you can listen and wash your dishes, you drive your car. There's so many other things you can do. You can multitask.
Regina, this is so great. You're going to have to come back on the program because I feel we have a lot more to talk about. But do you have a final word of advice for the listeners and viewers?
Yeah, well, it sounds like a lot of your audience is in the process of writing and they may be at the point of querying with their agent or without their agent, but querying to get an agent. And I would just encourage people to be very patient and to pace yourself because first of all, I know how tough it can be to get an agent. And once you've written your book, you're like, okay, let's go. And you're excited about moving forward. But I would just say that even if the process is slower than you had anticipated, you still have an opportunity to create momentum for yourself because that's the point where you're continuing to develop your audience and making sure that people, once the book gets published, they're ready for it. So just pace yourself. Querying can be emotionally draining, but know that there's something really special on the other side. So pace yourself.
I love that. Thank you so much, Regina. This has been such a pleasure speaking with you.
I'm so excited to have had the opportunity to speak to your audience. Thank you so much.
Follow me at EstelleErasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.